As I said, I'm Marian Francis. I'm your hostess for today, and we're really happy to have Michael Twidale here to talk to us on what's going to be a really, really interesting and entertaining talk. Michael is a professor in the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. His research interests are at the intersection of computer-supported cooperative work, computer-supported collaborative learning, human-computer interaction, and socio-technical systems design. His many projects include studies of informal social learning of technology, technological appropriation, and problem-solving activities at the intersection of search, learning, and creativity. He is interested in how people learn new technologies and new features of existing technologies, and how they succeed, fail, struggle, tinker, help their friends, and try to search for technical solutions online, just like a lot of us do. He likes it when things go wrong, and today he'll tell us a story and give us information about a study a study that did not work as intended. So we will turn it over to you, Michael, and we're really looking forward to your talk. Thank you for being here.
Great, thank you very much. So I am now attempting to share my screen, and hopefully that has worked. If somebody can just type in as a message to say you can see my screen okay, and we'll take it away. So thank you for the very kind introduction. As described, I'll start off by talking about some of the big picture issues that interest me, and then how that led to this particular study that I think we might call in retrospect rather hubristic. You know, I thought, oh, this is all going to work out fine, and it went wrong, but in a very interesting way. Yeah, I'm interested in the intersection and interaction between human-computer interaction, learning, and search. And of course, Maryland, you have many people who've been pioneers in human-computer interaction, and I might describe some of that as making technology easier to use. I'm especially interested in the initial use, where people are trying to learn how to use the technology. So then the challenge is, well, how can we design new computer systems, new interfaces, so that they're easier to learn, maybe even easier to guess? And so that then creates the challenge, well, you know, how would we design to support learnability of tech? And that might be something in the interface itself, or in extra supplemental things we have around. So when you're encountering yet another technology you have to learn, yet another website, yet another online application form to get your vaccine, they are somewhat easier to learn how to do. And that raises questions of, well, you know, if I was that great that I could design interfaces that were completely guessable, that would be nice. I don't think I can. I'm not sure many people can. So how might we teach people how to enable them to learn how to learn new technologies better, faster, cheaper? And over the years, I've looked at individuals struggling to learn tech on their own. I got very interested in people asking for and helping others to learn technology. And that was initially in the workplace setting. I'm now increasingly interested in how that can happen in a domestic setting. And over the years, more and more people are using Google to try and solve their technology problems, along with trying to figure it out on their own, along with helping their colleagues or family members. So what I'm really intrigued by is, how come the world seems to split into people who self-identify as techies and other people who self-identify as non-techies, and to the non-techies, there is this deep annoyance that their techie friend just has to walk up to some whole new technology and they touch it and have some Borg-like mental interaction and just know how to make it work. And if you're a non-techie, you say, well, my techie friend just hits the keyboard, bang, 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 and it works. And I hit the keyboard, bang, 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 and it doesn't work. Why? Is this genetic? No, I think that the people who self-identify as techies, other people called techies, have acquired a set of skills that they may not actually be aware that they have, and I'm calling that computational metacognition. They can think about their own thinking, they have a set of tech learning skills, but this is rather tacit knowledge, I think, for a lot of them. It's like riding a bicycle. It's like, well, I can do it, I can show you me doing it, but I don't know what I'm doing. It just works for me and it doesn't work for you, and I have no idea. So I'm intrigued by how could we figure out what that tacit knowledge is. And I think, you know, it's a mixture of many different things, but some of those are information search and information literacy. And again, if I want to jump up, you know, super high level, I think we as universities should be trying to embrace mass citizen data literacy, information literacy, technology literacy, and search literacy, because these are so important throughout people's lives, not just in their work lives, everyday lives. Governments are making decisions based on data. And what do you say? Well, just trust the people in the white coats. How can we help people say trust but verify? In the 19th century, it was a big push towards book literacy, saying, well, you know, how can we have a functioning democracy if lots of people can't read and write? Now I think we need data literacy, information literacy, technology literacy, and search literacy. And of course, the problem is in real life, these and many other things all get jumbled up. People don't normally say, oh, I think I'd be to have a technology learning experience now. It's like, no, I need to get something done. Oh, I don't know how to do it. Oh, I better find out how to do it. Oh, and meanwhile, the phone's rung and I've got to get the kids' tea and I've got to get back to it. Things are jumbled. I think in our disciplinary analysis, we often think it would be nice if they were neat and tidy, and they're not. So today I'm talking about a project funded by Google, looking at search, and it involved me and a group of colleagues at Nottingham University, including Sophie Rutter, who is now at the University of Sheffield, Verena Blinzer, who was at the University of Regensburg. So the PI there was Max Wilson, and we were looking at technology search and trying to find out how do people learn new technologies. And again, as I said, trying to figure out, is there a difference between what self-identified techies do when they're learning a new technology and non-techies? And then if we can sort of figure out that difference, maybe we could teach it to the people who don't have the necessary skills so that they can learn better, faster, and cheaper. So it's certainly the case that the learning of technology is turning into a search problem. Time and again, I see people sort of having a go, trying to guess themselves. It doesn't work. If they've got a friend nearby, they'll ask their friend. If they don't have a friend nearby, they'll go online and search for it. And a lot of the time, if you type your tech query into Google, you'll get a result. Isn't that nice? But it doesn't work all the time. And that's what we were really interested in about these more challenging technology learning issues, where you really need more sophisticated search literacy skills in order to learn what it is you need to know in order to get the technology to work. So we decided to look at technology problems related to configuring phones. And why do we pick phones, especially smartphones? Well, there's a lot of them about. People spend a lot of time with them. They're certainly very powerful. They have as much power as, you know, earlier supercomputers. And for a lot of people, they're sort of kind of ordinary. So it's not going to be some kind of intimidating technology task. So these were our, you know, broad aims. You know, I particularly want to know what makes techies good at techie stuff. I was especially interested in trying to figure out, was there something about trying to uncover how to do something with technology that was different to other kinds of search tasks? Max, my co-PI, Max Wilson, he was a bit skeptical about that. He thought, you know, maybe, you know, all difficult searches are pretty much the same. And I was saying, no, I think there's something weird about when you're looking for tech help. Let's see. And I really wanted to try and extract this essence of techiness. What is it that techies do, so that we can teach it to other people? And so Sophie, who has a lot of expertise in the whole area of information seeking, information retrieval, was very interested in the different tactics that have been identified over the years by information science researchers. And, are there variations? Is it that those people who are good at finding stuff have more tactics? So anyway, we wanted to just look at the difference between the techies and the non-techies. And I will note that we were not trying to say, oh, is there a difference between techies and non-techies? Well, of course, there's going to be a difference. That's going to be obvious. But given that domain expertise and search expertise will obviously affect success, what were the tactical differences? That's what we wanted to do. So we spent a lot of time trying to invent a pretty good study. And I have to admit, I got rather smug about our design of that. So it's going to be a pre-task questionnaire where we ask people about their search skills and their technical knowledge using the EU Digital Competence Framework. We were going to give them some tasks to do, 3 tasks, they had 20 minutes for it. They could do them in any order, any pace. And then afterwards, we'd give them a task domain familiarity questionnaire, and we want to do that after they're given the task, so we're not priming them. And then we did a post-task interview where we'd screen recorded them searching for information, and then we could do a reflective, cued, retrospective think aloud of their search processes. And then right at the end, we wanted to check for this idea of ecological validity, more on that soon, by asking questions sort of, is that what you would normally do? In the sense of how artificial is our study? So we recruited participants from Nottingham University. It was very much a convenience sample. We were looking for people who self-identified as techies and other people who self-identified as non-techies. And participants were both domestic and international students and other people connected to the university. And as I said, we asked participants to rate themselves about their technical competence, their search competence, and we were going to give them an Android phone with a challenge to do, more on that soon. So we wanted to know how familiar they were with the Android operating system. It's like, have you got an Android phone? Have you got an iPhone? Have you got any kind of smartphone? Questions like that. So we, especially I, was super keen on trying to develop authentic tasks, the sort of things that people do in real life, as contrasted with some of my grumpiness about reading some of the papers in the search literature where you think, that's a very peculiar task. I don't think normal people would ever want to do that task. So one thing that I found very useful in a lot of usability studies is the imaginary friend approach. So here we have, we say, oh yeah, imagine your friend. Your friend has recently bought a new phone, and sometimes their child uses the phone and your friend has asked you to help them configure this phone. And so we have these 3 tasks where they want to sort of protect their child from downloading things that might be problematic, and they'd like to set up a separate profile. That's question 2, but they haven't been able to do this, and so why would your friend find this difficult? Can you do this for them? If not, why not? More on that soon. And then a more open-ended, what would you recommend to your friend to do to make their phone safe for a child to do? And so that's our sort of hypothetical set of tasks. And there's sort of careful thought behind those, which I will try and describe now. So we hoped that these were typical of rather everyday technical problems. And the first 2 tasks are, you need to find specific how-to information, how to make it work on this phone that we handed to the participant. And then task 3 is more of sort of open-ended questions. A question like, what else would you recommend it? So that's more like some of the information search tasks that you see in a lot of places. The first 2 is you're finding information, but you're finding information in order to do a thing. And you'll know whether your information search was successful, not when you've retrieved relevant information, but when you've retrieved relevant information and you can actually do with it the thing you wanted to do. So task one, which is about, the parent wants there to be some control, but not totally forbid downloads. There is a nice clear solution, which is to set up parental controls in the Android Play Store. So that's fine if you know how to locate the Play Store using the phone and then determine the appropriate age rating. So that's a fairly straightforward task. But as we were developing these tasks, we wanted to make them non-trivial for technologically competent people, but also they weren't going to require any advanced technological skills. So no, rooting the phone or anything complicated to do it. What we were very keen on is those kinds of technical how-to tasks where Google isn't perfect. So a lot of technical problems, you type in, how do I do blah, 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 how do I do a pivot table? If you type that into Google, you get a YouTube video, how to make a pivot table, bang, you're done. So we developed our task so there was no single simple how-to video on YouTube, how to do it. And we also very carefully worded the task statement so that the keyword terms that would get you towards an answer were not in our framing of the task. We also deliberately sequenced the 3 tasks illogically because often when you have a real information need, you don't think of your information need in the right order. So we encourage people to pick the tasks in any order, but we hadn't pre-digested them like we do when we're teaching. When we're teaching, we give people tasks in a nice, sensible order, so everything is step after step. In real life, things are not that well ordered, so we want to make things more like real life. And so I'm calling this like cussed task design. We deliberately chose not to use the magic words that if you type in those magic words, it's really easy to get to the answer. So you've kind of got to do a translation between the articulated information need and the actual words that would get you to an answer, because real life is messy and we wanted to replicate that messiness. Now you may be horrified to know that our second task, which was to set up a separate profile for the child, so you've got 2 profiles, one for the parent, one for the child, is actually impossible on this phone. It's setting up separate profiles is entirely possible on many phones. In fact, most Android phones. It just didn't happen to be possible on the particular version of the Android operating system that we provided them with. And when you search for it in Google, you'll discover all these other versions of the Android operating system for which it's perfectly possible. And so they would kind of get in the way. And the reason why we wanted to do that is sometimes your information need may not be possible. And I'll just take you back to note there were certain clues in that. Question number 2, why would your friend find this difficult? Can you do it for them? If not, why not? So there were sort of little clues it might not be possible, but we wanted to really find out what happens when you've got a real life task and you've got to decide when to give up. Is it out there? Is there a workaround? Can you satisfy? Can you compromise? And again, because that's what real life is like. Real life tasks may be impossible, but they're not so normal in the design of studies. And so, in artificial intelligence, this is sometimes called the closed world hypothesis. And it's like, well, it's all well and good, but it doesn't really help us understand or test or indeed teach the appropriate skills of when to give up, when to compromise, when to work around. I mean, so much of our rhetoric in our teaching from K-12 through to undergrad is, well, I've asked you to do something, of course the solution. You've just got to work and work and work and work and work until you get to it. It's like, that may not necessarily be a good preparation to real life where you're trying to do impossible tasks, something that can be very traumatic for doctoral students because they think there's always going to be an answer to something, because up to now, there's always been an answer to something. And then they say, right, well, now my task is how to cure cancer. That might be a little bit too difficult for a PhD. So I'll just raise here provocatively, if all the tasks you assign in any kind of study you do, if all of them are possible, what percentage of reality are you actually testing or evaluating? Okay, so we ran the study, we gave them, here's the phone, here's the task, here's a computer you can use for looking up stuff, here's a pen and paper just by the side if you ever want to take any notes. And as the study was being run, and Sophie and Verena were running the study, and they sort of report back, and I got more and more smug as they reported back as we were going, because we got these wonderful unsolicited comments about the tasks we were assigned, where people said, oh, yeah, I know that's a very real kind of task. I'm always getting requests like that, or, oh, I am that friend who's always asking for help. So there was a lot of buy-in to the tasks, so much so that some people didn't get to complete everything in the 20 minutes. And they would say, oh, can I have some more time? I really want to know the answers. I've got to find this out. So they were highly motivated to complete the tasks. And it seemed to me much more like what you may get with playing a computer game. It's like, no, can I have some more time? I really want to finish this. So it was very different from other evaluations of interfaces that I've done. Rarely when I've been asking people to test a website for me if people begged for extra time. So, it's kind of thought-provoking to me. It's like, why? Is it because they're intrigued by the problem? I think many were, got very involved, invested in it. They just got obsessed. They just had to know the answer. Another one I'll come back to later is, well, was it just a desire to please? They just switched into being a good student, taking like a test and exam, and they just wanted to pass to get the right answer. Anyway, they seem to be very bought into the task design. So very briefly about our participants, there were 39 of them. They were mostly young, well-educated. You can see the age range there, so definitely skewing young, more female than male, but at least we've got a mixture of undergrads, master's students, doctoral students, 2 are employed, 1 unemployed, from a range of different academic and non-academic departments in the university or associated with the university. Many were from different countries, as you'd expect in a sort of global university like Nottingham University in the English Midlands. Less than half had English as their first language, but only 2 thought that they were influenced by sort of language difficulties. I mean, one said, oh, I think, if I wasn't doing this study for you, I'd try and solve that problem, but I'd use Baidu, the Chinese search engine. So, what can we say about our mixture of participants? Well, it wasn't, awful in terms of representative, but, is it representative of humanity? There's 8 billion of us on the planet. No, not that wonderful, but I've seen worse. More on that later. And as I said, we'd done these evaluations. So we had 17 who had high search literacy and high domain knowledge, some 13 who had high search literacy but low domain knowledge, and then 9 had low search literacy and low domain knowledge. So this is going to be the last good piece of quantitative information before it goes horribly wrong. This is us mapping all our participants by their ratings of their technical knowledge on their search skills. So it's a nice range. And, we're going to say, okay, well, what do all the green people have in common? What do all the blue people have in common? What do all the red people have in common in terms of, their success and the tactics that they use? So far, so good. And then, of course, it all went horribly wrong. As I said, I was feeling very smug. Aren't we clever? We're going to have such great data. Well, didn't quite work out like that. So firstly, only 23% of our participants successfully completed all 3 tasks, to the extent of actually getting things to work on the phone or identifying that, task 2 was impossible, but there were workarounds, ways of getting past it. What we did find was that there were an awful lot of tactics, search tactics being used. Sophie was our expert on that. But domain knowledge did seem to affect the choice of tactics, but not necessarily leading to greater search success. And the thing that totally baffled me and the rest of the team was there was no significant difference between the 3 groups. So, it wasn't like The people with the high search, high tech, the green people did not do better in solving the task than the red people or the blue people. So that was very, very weird. Max Wilson was our quant expert, and poor old Max, he searched every which way to say, like, it's like, what? No, there's no significant difference here. This is really strange. I was bewildered because it's like I was not interested in sort of proving a significant success difference between the groups, because that was obvious. What I want to know is, like, what did they do that was different to extract the essence of techiness? Sophie was our expert in all the different tactics that have been used in the information seeking literature, and she got all of those, but again, no correlation between which tactics were working well or, you know, correlated with success. So she was exasperated. So we were, in summary, unable to identify any numerical differences between the use of the tactics and task familiarity and technical knowledge. Absolutely nothing. And I mean, I'm just replicating one of our lab meetings, but there must be a significant difference. And, you know, as we were writing this up and sharing our results and submitting for publication, we realized how many subtle pressures there are to report a significant difference. And, you know, people who we talked to and reviewers, you know, were making, you know, helpful suggestions because they were just as bewildered as us. And so, you know, the first point is like, well, maybe you ran the study wrong. You know, that would be perfectly reasonable. A reviewer reading this would say, you know, well, maybe you ran the study wrong. Well, we were very, very careful running. So I don't think we did it wrong. Was it because we gave people too little time? Well, we certainly didn't give them as much time as they would have in real life. But, you know, we tried to do this to try and replicate what's going on. So I'll address the reasons why at the end, following the Q&A. So was it the tests were too easy? Was it the tests were too hard? Was it the tests were too realistic or something? Or, you know, at times I'm sort of cynically thinking, well, maybe we created the wrong task to generate publishable results. One reviewer said, well, maybe there's something weird about this text search that, you know, tasks that you've created that's just anomalous. And so it's like not like all the other searches studied in the literature. So, well, you know, thank you for being helpful, but I don't think so. I mean, it can't be that, you know, strange. So, you know, of course, you know, we read in the literature about replication and reproducibility, and people say, oh, yes, we're all in favor of null results. You know, you try and publish a null result. Publishers don't like them. I think our reviewers just thought they were deeply weird. So did we. So there's kind of a challenge in talking about null results. I think there's something very interesting there, which I will now, you know, move on to. So we had lots and lots of numbers, just not very much to say about them. We found lots and lots and lots of search tactics, 77, and these align very nicely with all the various attempts to generate sets of search tactics in the literature. And Sophie was expert in that. It's like, yep, we found all of those that Marcia Bates found. We found all those that, you know, lots of other researchers have found. What we did notice was that pretty much every participant had quite a lot of search tactics, but different people had different combinations of search tactics. And it's entirely likely that, if anything, we have an undercount of the number of search tactics, as if 77 wasn't enough, and an undercount of how many each individual had, because they sort of like ran out of enthusiasm as telling us of the many and various ones they had. So what I want to note here is this is very different from what you might call the old days of search studies, where you were studying people who'd never heard of the World Wide Web, and you exposed them to the web, and they weren't very good at searching because they hadn't done it before, and they had a very limited number of tactics. Our participants did not lack for tactics. So, you know, I think tactics are necessary, but they're not sufficient. You know, even when you've got quite a few tactics, you can still struggle with these harder challenges. So no relationship between search skill and tactic use, so all over the place. I just assumed that those with high technical knowledge would have access to more search tactics than those with less technical knowledge, regardless of how familiar they were with smartphones in general. Nope, didn't work. So what's going on there? It wasn't that our participants found it difficult to search for and find solutions. It wasn't like, oh, I've got nothing to type into Google. No, that doesn't happen. People typed things into Google, people found things in Google. It was not difficult for people to find relevant information. They found information, it was definitely relevant. What was difficult was finding relevant information solutions that actually worked, that they could put to use on the phone that we handed them to configure it appropriately. So one issue that emerged from that is like, well, you can measure search success, finding a relevant information, but that's rather different from task success. What can you actually do something useful with information? And we realized that there's a fair chunk of information seeking studies that only really look at search success, what you found, not what you do with it. And of course, it's very easy when you've got a technical how-to task to measure, well, did they do it? Could they do it? And often we found that people could find stuff, but they couldn't make use of it. And that can be a problem for a whole host of different reasons. You can find technical results, but they're just too fiddly to implement, or in order to do them, you've got to do something else, and then you've got to do something else, and so on forever. So we've got lots of tasks, like, we've got lots of stuff to show, but it's not terribly exciting. So this got me thinking, and this is something I want to work on next. So, any ideas or feedback you can have on it, I very much appreciate. So I've been very influenced by, an early paper in human-computer interaction called Minimizing Ecological Gaps in Interface Design. Ecological gaps is an issue that has been around in the psychology literature for a very long time. And it's basically saying, well, if you test things in a lab, maybe a lab isn't a kind of normal place for doing things. And maybe you give tasks that in that lab that make it very easy for you to measure something, make it very easy for you to test a hypothesis, because you create a control study and you control away all the complicating factors. So you can just measure the one thing you're interested in. It's good science. But it may be that then you end up with tasks that are just not very real, things that people might actually want to do in the context they would have to use them. And you are deliberately designing away messiness. And I kind of want to embrace the messiness to say, well, what happens, away from the lab? What would people normally be doing? So our participants actually sort of challenged, my attempts at designing ecological validity. So as I said, I tried very, very hard to design tasks that I thought were authentic, that were realistic. And they were very polite and said, yes, this is a very realistic task. But in the running of the study, and especially in the interview afterwards, people challenged our ecological validity and said, well, if I'd been doing this for real, I'd have taken a break and come back later. And, they would say, well, I think by now I'd have asked my knowledgeable friend for a bit of advice. So, of course, they couldn't do that in our study because they didn't bring a friend and they couldn't really take a break. So real life searches are often iterated, interleaved. You do it with lots of other things. You can take a break. They're social, and the satisfying thing is like, well, that's not what I wanted, but it'll just have to do. And of course, we designed that in task 2 because what you wanted was to have, 2 configurations. That's not possible. But what are you going to do? You're going to help your friend, so you come up with something that will do. Now, one thing that kind of amused me was this sort of breaking the fourth wall, which is something you get, talk about in theatre. Classic example would be Richard III, who starts talking directly to the audience. So the situation where people kind of admit that the play, is not real life. I'm in a play, and I'm now going to talk to you, remind you, I'm an actor in a play, and you're the audience. So let's stop pretending this is real life. And it just kind of amused me that, you know, some of our participants were sort of kind of so relaxed, that's wonderful, we try very hard to make them relax, and would sort of tell us the way in which our user test was not actually real. So I've got, you know, a whole load of examples, and I'm just going to skim through some of them now. So this was in sort of the interview at the end, where we'd sort of shown them what they did, and we're asking them some questions about it. And so here one participant says, well, you know, I don't think I found the whole thing. If I was doing this in an uncontrolled environment in my bedroom, I think I would have spent a lot of time, a lot more searching individually for videos for audio. Here I had to stop because I got, you know, the task had to go on to the next one. And so the our interviewer said, okay, you'd have spent more time on this had it been in real life. Yep. And, you know, it was a starting point. I'm just going to get along with there. And then they said, but again, I have to say I am pretty technology challenged when it comes to phones, so I could skew your results big time. So they're actually sort of talking about the experiment. This is like the breaking of the fourth wall. And, you know, so again, our interviewer said, so you said about the first task that normally would spend longer. So with the second, what would you have done? I'd have stopped and taken a day off and then come back to it later. And it's like, oh boy, yeah, you know, that's what people do. That we don't see that in our studies, do we? Because we don't design our studies to find out those things. And then, again, final question. So when you've had previous technical problems, how would you normally resolve them? I try Googling. If nothing works, I take it to, you know, a person I know. I think I'll skim through some of the others. This one was somebody who basically wanted to challenge the whole, you know, we've got a task and there's, you know, there's another way around it, which is like, you shouldn't be doing this. So this was a person who wanted to sort of rant about censoring children and how it's, you know, more important to talk to the child about what they should and should not be downloading rather than trying to lock them out of it, because they'll find a way around anyway. And so this one struck me as realizing, well, I've designed a task so there is a, quote, right answer. And here's somebody else saying, no, I challenge the premises behind what you consider a right answer. And I want to talk about a completely different kind of right answer, which is not about finding a technological solution in Google. It's about talking to the child. So there are often real life answers to real life problems that don't necessarily fit our information seeking categories. And there were several people who said, you know, well, you know, I do help other people, you know, so my mother would have a tech problem and then they Google it and it's like, it's not even restricted to non-technology people. And so, you know, they Google it, I Google it for them, you know, I become the designated technology helping person. It's like, I don't even think of myself as a technology expert. I don't even think of myself as a searching expert. So they're quite modest about it, but they clearly are the expert because their friends come to them for help and they can get a little bit annoyed. It's like, why didn't you just Google it yourself? Here was another one where the questioner, you know, we were asking, well, it's a lab setting, you know, is this like real life? Yes, it is pretty much. You said earlier that your mother comes to you. Are you somebody who has people come to them with tech problems? And I say, I don't know why, I'm not the best person. Yeah, so my mum, she doesn't live here. So when I go back to Greece, so she usually has problems either with her laptop or a tablet or a phone, but the trouble is she uses brands I don't use. So although I have two younger brothers and they are completely digitally literate, even more than me, she keeps calling me for every problem she has. So again, you, in sort of the family dynamics, you can become the tech expert, even though you don't necessarily identify as the tech expert, but you kind of know how to look things up. So again, I started off thinking, oh, there's this nice, clear techie, non-techie distinction, but there were many people who were clearly regarded as techies by family members, even though they're quite militantly saying, well, I don't really know that much, but I can look stuff up, you know, what's the big deal? And I think this is, you know, an issue that how we teach people about, you know, there are skills of how to search these things, and it doesn't, you you don't have to be a genius to do it. It's not that hard, but it's not completely obvious either. There are skills to be learned. This person say, I already did something like this for one of my brothers. And again, it's like, I don't know why people keep on asking me to do these kinds of things. Here's another one about, a different person giving, there's another solution, which is go talk to the child. But they kind of liked the challenge, the task, because they've got a little niece, and so eventually she's going to have a phone. So I imagine I'll be asked to set that up for her. So yeah, very realistic task. I think final one on this. Are you somebody who people come to help them resolve tech problems? Strangely, yes, but I'm not tech savvy. I just do a lot of research. So again, this peculiar sense of sort of identity, but I can do it. I can find stuff out. It's not that hard. So again, back to this sort of fourth wall things where people would sort of ask us what they were allowed to do. And it was clear that they wanted to be a good research subject. They wanted to help us with our research. So they didn't necessarily act how they would normally act. They acted how they thought we would want them to act in order to help us do our research. It's like, well, that's very kind of you. It's very polite, but really, I want to know, what do you normally do? Not what do you do when you're in a lab trying to help us out. So, you could find out some information by looking on the back of the phone, but they didn't know if that counted as cheating. People were asking, saying, is that what you want? Or I fear I've messed up your study. And so, yeah, actually, at first, I thought, I know you said implement it on a phone, but I thought it might complicate your things. I think they thought that they would mess up our study. So I opened a Word document and noted one of the solutions there, just to help us. It's like, oh boy, this issue of realistic studies and how you perform as a research subject can get in the way. So it's all my fault because I deliberately designed in mess. I read these papers about ecological validity, and I thought, oh, you should always do ecological validity. It's really, really important. But I hadn't realized that it does have costs. And the reason is that when you're trying to design a more ecologically valid study, is about uncovering and embracing confounds and mess. It's trying to see what people really do. And what people really do is live in real life, and real life is very messy. Whereas a controlled experiment is kind of the opposite. A controlled experiment is controlled. You carefully design to study one thing, so you carefully design to eliminate the confounds. And so, like, why would I be surprised that I found all these confounds when we design an ecologically valid study? Well, I didn't realize how many confounds there would be, and I didn't realize how big they would be. An authentic probably always means messy. So I mentioned, our participants, there was some diversity, but they weren't that diverse. But just note, please, how much messiness we found in such a limited sample of reality of the population. So I think there's probably even more mess if we'd had a more representative sample of people across the broader population. So, we got enough mess even with our limited study. If we'd actually broadened it, we'd have had even more mess. That'd be nice. We did manage to get a paper out of it. Lucky us. The reviewers' comments were basically trying to be helpful, but it's like, this is a very carefully constructed search task, so cleverly designed. Yeah, you're too smart for your own good, you guys. And they were trying to speculate, why did it not have the results? Is it something that they were so particular about our study, it may have diluted many of the effects of search and domain experience? It is a conundrum worth discussing. Yes, it certainly is. We're still trying to figure this one out. So, helpful comments by reviewers were equally baffled by why we weren't sort of finding what you might expect. So wrapping up now, Brian asked me to be provocative, so I need to provoke. So this is his last couple of slides. then I'll hand over and sort of attend to the questions. So, you know, I'm a big fan of ecological validity. It's good, but boy, can it be inconvenient. If you want to study real life searching, be warned, it's going to be messy. You know, there's that classic joke about the drunk who's sort of scrabbling around on a lamppost, and his other drunk friend comes and say, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Well, I've lost my keys." And he says, "Oh, well, you know, I can't see them here." And he says, no, I dropped them over there. And the drunk says, "Well, why are you looking here under the lamppost if you drop your keys over there?" And he said, "Well, the light's better here." And I sometimes think that, you know, in designing information studies, we can be like that drunk under the lamppost, because in the nice control studies, the light really is better. And you don't have to deal with all that darkness and mess. Try and beware of being nudged to find the right kind of results, and try and beware of, you know, when you self-censor, to ignore inconvenient messiness, because it doesn't tell a nice tidy story that you can publish. And I sort of want to provoke people to say, well, you know, what do you actually want to study? Do you want to study people searching, or do you want to study publishable searching activities? I do think reality wants to tell me a story. I think reality wants to tell you a story. It just may not be a story that I particularly want to hear, and it can be a bit of a challenge. It may not be a story that peer reviewers and journals particularly want to read about unless you can try and explain it to them. So please do it anyway. I think Oscar Wilde said it best: the truth is rarely pure and never simple. So that's it, and I will hand over to Brian to lead the Q&A.
So I would encourage everybody you can put questions in the chat, and if you do that, you might want to change it so that it says panelists and attendees in the to field there so that everybody can see. But the question I would have to start off is, do you still think there's something to your original intuition of there being different behaviors or strategies or approaches associated with the idea of techiness?
Yes, I think that one is the issue of ability to cope with partial solutions. So if you're not a techie and you sort of search online and you find a result and it says, okay, do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and you're done. And then you get to step 2, and step 2 is impossible on that phone. And then if you're a non-techie, it's like, well, I don't know what to do. A techie can then say, okay, well, how can I translate that into something that will work on this phone? So I think that part of, you know, techiness is able to deal with partial solutions and modify them, and also to sort of control when you're hitting overload, when something is not working. So you've got, I thought it would be more a repertoire of techies would just have more things that would work. I think some of the reasons that some of the techies came to grief in our study is they were so utterly convinced that there must be a solution to number 2 that they kept on going and ran out of time, whereas the non-techies saying, I can't find anything, well, I'll do something. So that may be one of the reasons why, you know, the techies did not dramatically outperform the non-techies.
So this actually relates to a question then asked Valerie Nessett. It asked, could the lack of significant difference excuse me, between the groups be explained by non-techies being more creative with workarounds because they were not familiar with the technology?
Yes, yeah. Now again, this is just an impression, and we kind of looked at the data, and it's not complete, but yeah, I think it's that the non-techies were more open to different solutions. A lot of people were just convinced there must be an answer to this, that morally Samsung must have provided this, and it must just be out there. So yeah, I think, Valerie, that may partially account for it in this particular instance, but I want to find out more about this. I mean, it was really not what we expected.
Okay. Another question is kind of what tips and best practices are you suggesting for data and tech literacy? And I guess I would modify that a little bit. You highlighted an interesting finding, if you will, that, you know, unlike older studies where it was, you know, people have 3 strategies, or, you know, they're not sure what to do. Now they have 77 strategies. Okay, so what would you suggest for how we go about teaching this or thinking about this in this kind of complexity if we're dealing with a world where there's 77 strategies and it's not clear which ones actually matter?
Yeah. So I think, the first thing is, from various other people's research, I am starting to suspect a lot of people consider search skill binary. I can do search, my grandma can't do search. I can use Google, grandma can't. And if you think it's just binary, either you've got it or you don't, then you don't think of it as an improvable skill. And if you think of search as an improvable skill, like, playing golf or playing the violin, where you can always get better and better and better at it, then there's actually a reason to start reflecting on how to do better. If you think it's a simple binary, well, you may not even be aware that there is a way of improving on it. I think the other bit of it is, I was using this term computational metacognition. Reflecting on your own searching is well worth doing. And part of that is knowing when to give up on one tactic and when to try another. And I think it's quite revealing that, some of our participants saying, well, I'll just take a break. And it's like, that's a very sensible strategy. So you don't just keep on plugging away at it. And then, we know from a whole load of different sort of design challenges and creativity and problem solving, you take a break, your subconscious is still nibbling away at it. And you may think of alternate routes. So I think it's strangely, it's more like what we try and do when we teach design, where you've got a hard problem and there's a range of different ways, but you have to reflect on your own processes. I don't think we do enough of that.
So actually, since Sarah McGrew had asked 2 questions or comment on 2 things that related to this, Sarah, I gave you permission to talk. I gave you the ability to talk. I don't know if you have something you'd like to say or
sure. Thanks for that. First of all, the first question I put in there was just about the way that you sorted people in the first place into more technical, less technical, based on if I understood it correctly, as a self-assessment, and just wondering if that's part of the complication that people don't seem to be very good at self-assessing in this area, and whether you thought at all about that. And then Wayne asked this question about what I see as more like ethnographic methods in terms of understanding what people do when they're in their bedrooms alone to search for information online, and how we can get better at capturing those things.
Yes. So I am now far more skeptical about people's self-assessment than I was. And it's partly, the opposite skew. These people who did really well, who kept on saying, I'm not very techie, I'm not very good at this. And they did all these wonderful things. So I think, there is an identity issue about whether you consider yourself a techie or not. And yeah, I think, we were using these standard European Union rating kinds of questions, like, I can use a wide range of search strategies when searching for information, browsing on the web. I can filter and monitor information I receive. I know whom to follow online, information sharing places, that kind of thing. So they were fairly straightforward questions, and I wasn't too worried about them, but I'm now a lot more skeptical. To your second point, yes, I think ethnographic methods are the way to go on this, just to see the variety of complicating factors and workarounds that people do, and how, part of it, I think, is these kinds of more difficult things are much more iterated and interleaved with other stuff than I'd suspected. So, if you want to do a lab-based study, that's nice for a sort of one-shot in and out, you've got it or you haven't, and then you're done. But a lot of things we do in life involving searches aren't those single shots. They take a bit more time. And I am sure into, ethnographic methods are the way to go there.
I think the idea of skepticism about self-assessment, the relationship between ability, identity, and what other people perceive, your self-image and what other people perceive you, are things we've actually seen in some of the work we've done with students in classes. I know Beth St. Jean had identified, we have students that are like, oh, yeah, I've got this, and then they don't. So I think that's something that we had seen. So, all right. So there's a last question just to wrap things up. Are there any resources you would suggest or find helpful related to the ethnographic methods you're talking about? Do you think you would be particularly relevant or useful in this context?
So there's been various books by people like Andy Crabtree, Mark Ransfield. These people who are based at Nottingham University at one point in time, who have written about ethnographic methods in technology settings. They mostly looked in the workplace. These are more in sort of a domestic setting. So I'll sort of pass those on to Brian to pass on to you afterwards. But yeah, I think there's good stuff there. I just want to address Wayne's question there about, the person talking to a mother back in Greece. I think there's, diary studies are good, but then you've got to fill out the damn thing. I think there's a lot, if we could do something with logs of your searches with decent visualization. I don't just want a list of everything I've typed in, but if we had a sort of good visualization of stuff I've done, then it would be much easier to reflect on what it is that you've done to either improve yourself or talk to somebody who was teaching you how to search better. So I think log data has potential for the person who created the log data to reflect on, but we need far better data visualization to support those kinds of discussions.
Well, with that, thank you very much, Michael, for this great talk. I'll hand it back to Marianne to wrap things up.
Thank you, Michael, for that super interesting talk. It was really wonderful. As for the questions, the people who asked the questions really helped to pull everything together too. So we will have our next iteration of the Search Mastery Speaker Series on April 12th. And Anna Ndumu from the University of Maryland will be the speaker that day, talking about search mastery as critical information literacy and what LIS adds to the conversation. So I hope everybody will join us for that. Somehow we'll try. We do post most of these talks on the Search Mastery Interest Group website, so we should have something available shortly. If you want to, previous talks are up already, and the next talk will be up shortly. So take a look at that. We'll try and share a link with you at some point as well. So thanks again for joining, and we hope to see you next time.